All right, let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Magic Sandwich Show on the 1st of May. As usual, we'll be taking calls today. We've got two lined up, so there's going to be some spaces available if anyone wants to join the show. If you do, please send a contact request to Skype Magic Sandwich Show. Please do not send me any messages or send me any requests unless you actually want to appear on the show. It just sort of like clogs up the system, so please don't do that. I'm pleased to say that on the show this week we have Aaron Ra and Thunderfoot, and we also did have Don Exodus until about 2 minutes ago. I've also got to apologise for the delay in starting. That was because I decided with 3 minutes to go I would take update my Skype. And that actually took a few more minutes than I thought it would. So there we are. We're going to kick off with the topic of eugenics, because I know that Aaron specifically wanted to talk about this in relation to a question he was asked on YouTube. And having done that, we will then be taking our first caller. I'm not entirely sure that the first caller is being genuine, but we shall see. It will be entertaining in any event. Aaron, did you want to explain the issue about eugenics that you wanted to discuss? Would you like to unmute your microphone before you do so?
Oh, these technicalities. You know, the reason that we're always late on this show is because we're a bunch of doddering bastards that are trying to figure out what wire goes where so that it doesn't burn out the toaster. And this is always in the last few seconds before we go live. Okay, so it wasn't that I necessarily wanted to talk about eugenics, but I had been asked my opinion of it. And the only opinion that I wanted to share initially, before we get everybody else's input on this, was the concept of Gattaca versus idiocracy. I mean, at current, we are in a situation, at least in the United States, where we reward those who proliferate uncontrollably and without necessarily being able to produce the most productive of all citizens, and those who possibly might have been a better source of genetic material are procreating less often. And so we can all see where that's going. Now, with Gattaca suggested, if anybody's seen that movie, suggested a kind of a nice alternative where you can genetically sample your gametes to take control of human evolution so that we don't leave it to inhumane selective pressures. We can then control it ourselves, and it seemed like a more humane option. Certainly better than well, when I was 18 years old, I remember seeing these pictures of starving African kids, and people are wanting me to donate to charities to, resolve this. And I'm thinking, when I was a kid, I saw pictures of starving African kids, and when I grow up, I'm going to see pictures of starving African kids. It seems that if you're in a situation where you cannot provide for your family, maybe you shouldn't be producing children. And that's kind of the stem of, I think, my perspective on eugenics. Okay, and now I'm interested more in other people's opinions on the topic.
Well, before you move on, somebody has posted in the comments that that's not eugenics, that's designer babies. And I think this is perhaps at the heart of what you wanted to discuss and the actual proper definition of what eugenics is.
Okay, well, eugenics is when humans take over their own selective process. It's selective breeding. It is, well, not selective breeding. It's encouraging traits and discouraging traits as a matter of human decision. That, I think, would be the definition of eugenics.
Thunder.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, you start off with the facile observation that things that can't go on forever don't. And obviously, if everyone survives, that is, there is essentially zero mortality, then the process of reproduction is non-perfect. So you are going to accrue mutations in the various genes, and eventually that will get to a point where the gene pool isn't viable anymore. Now, the way this has traditionally gone is that genetic diversity is preened back by natural selection. Now, it's my opinion that none of this will be a significant factor in that the rate that the technology is developing here, that is likely to be the decisive factor long before we actually get to the point where the mutations have accrued in the gene pool to an extent that the species is no longer viable.
I mean, one thing that seems to be happening is that human beings are sort of eliminating natural selection. In other words, okay, you have these starving children in Africa. Well, maybe they're just Africa can really only hold so many people. I mean, it's not necessarily this great fertile land. I mean, every environment has its carrying capacity, and in many ways we are exceeding it. And I mean, I am certainly a fan of the can't feed them, don't breed them mentality. But at the same time, I mean, what will be the effects if the somewhat, I don't want to say least desirable people, but oftentimes that is where the problem is coming from, are having children that they're unable to support. If natural selection were allowed to happen, they would, sort of fall out of favor because they wouldn't be able to sustain that. However, because we live in the society that we do, now basically the government and any organization like that is able to overpower natural selection. I'm not saying that these children should die, but at the same time, I mean, if you can't have the children, you don't have the means to care for them, well, maybe you shouldn't have them.
How does that argument extend to how you began your comment, which was humans are taking over natural selection? How does that argument work in relation to something like diabetes? Are you saying that diabetes those that are diabetic shouldn't be treated?
Which type of diabetes? That's two different. I mean, all right. First of all, type 1 diabetes. I mean, that's an autoimmune thing. That's childhood diabetes. Yes, that should definitely be treated. And that's more of it's oftentimes a result of an autoimmune thing where basically your body attacks your pancreatic cells and you can no longer produce insulin. Type 2 diabetes is that typically onsets way after childhood, way after the reproductive age, in fact, and that's oftentimes a result of a lifestyle choice. So, I mean, as far as not being able to treat type 2 diabetes, well, they're already past the childbearing age, so that really wouldn't have any effect on natural selection. So, if that makes sense, it's like Huntington's, for example. Why is Huntington still around if it's so deadly and you only need one dominant trait to knock out everything else and basically die of the illness? Well, it's still around because it doesn't have an effect until after you're of childbearing age. So you can have children before your fitness is decreased.
Now, Thunder mentioned a moment ago about, well, let me see if I can gather my thought on this. You know what? I'm getting old and addlepated.
Well, whilst you're getting your thoughts together, Aaron, just going back to your definition of eugenics would seem to me to include the treatment of diabetics and allowing them to continue what some may sort of like perhaps slightly cruelly refer to as a defective gene.
Well, no, it's not a defective gene. That's not. I mean, the diabetics or diabetes technically isn't completely genetic. I mean, it's not like you have a gene for diabetes or you don't. I mean, it's something that happens either A, because you're so bombarded with sugar and you're overweight and your body gets less sensitive to it, so your blood sugar rises, and then you get type 2 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is autoimmune. That's not genetic. I mean, your body basically just, it attacks your pancreas. It's something that happens. I mean, same thing with, I mean, it can also happen with the thyroid. I think it's Hashimoto's disease where your body makes antibodies against your thyroid gland. And again, that's not necessarily genetic. It's autoimmune. So.
Okay, well, what I was talking about is that, and people don't appreciate this. People think that dogs produce dogs produce dogs produce dogs, and they seem oblivious to the fact that the dogs that we had thousands of years ago are not the same dogs that we're going to have thousands of years from now. They don't appreciate that when they hold a Yorkie Terrier that 10,000 years ago or 10,000 generations ago, this was a wolf. They don't appreciate that life is fluid, life changes. And that means that all other things being constant, you still have to maintain your genetics. Now, what Thunder was saying was how the needs of the individual may not necessarily be in line with the needs of the species. We already know that if we were to abstain from procreation until, say, 25 years old or 30 years old, if everybody waited a bit before they had children, we could, in as few as 80 generations, we could prolong the human lifespan. This was brought up, I forget who brought it up, but it was brought up in one of the TED Talks this way. But of course, what we're doing is quite the opposite. We have people that are getting pregnant, at 12 to 15, and so we're working in the opposite scale. Now, I thought that it would be great if you could have a system where, children are born temporarily sterilized, just everybody. And when you have, just a hypothetical situation, don't freak out. Okay, now just imagine that in order to have kids, you didn't have accidental pregnancies, you didn't have unwanted pregnancies. In order to get pregnant, you had to show financial responsibility, or you at least had to make a conscious choice. I want to have a child. We have this waiver. Let's have a kid. So that you can't have the accidental birth. What would that one aspect do to the demographics of humanity? If you could just make a conscious choice to have a kid and it didn't happen if you didn't make that choice, that alone would be hugely advantageous. Go ahead.
Yep, I actually agree. I thought they should put stuff in the water and you should have to get the antidote to get rid of it. I mean, in my opinion, and that would make me sleep a hell of a lot easier. I mean, hell, I don't want to have to worry about that stuff, But of course,
with your sexual proclivities, Don, I don't think that's an issue you need to concern yourself about. Thunder, I think, wanted to.
Oh no, Clinton, good.
Yeah, I mean, so briefly, there's the thing about what's best for the individual and what's best for the species aren't necessarily the same thing. In order to have, if you like, longevity on the gene pool, you need diversity within it. However, for the individual, what you really want is the best set of genes. But of course, if everyone has those same genes, then you're in a genetic bottleneck. Everyone is susceptible to the same stuff. It's putting all your eggs in one basket. So there is the interesting question that if you can actually select these the genetics and everyone chooses the same thing, you do make it more likely that your species will become extinct, even if all the individuals are actually more competitive themselves. Just a thought.
Okay, well, the fortunate thing in our situation is that we do have such a massive gene pool that even if we did have everybody making the same choice on their genetic outcome, it wouldn't necessarily bottleneck us. And you're right that quite the opposite of what what the Nazis were trying to do. I mean, what we need is diversity. There's no such thing as a pure race. That's absurd. That's where the Nazis were completely wrong. What you need is the wider gene pool, and because throughout this diversity, new, novel, advantageous mutations can arise anywhere. You need more diversity to take advantage of that, to find it, and then if you have a trait emerge in one group, it's now possible to have advantageous traits spread throughout, and where we can, again, artificially take care of our own evolution.
Well, I read something that there's more genetic diversity between two of the same villagers in Eastern Africa than there is between, me and an Asian person or something like that. Basically, between any other two people on the planet, we are more similar than two people who look identical, just in the same village in Eastern Africa, where we originated.
You're absolutely true, because since modern humanity emerged in Africa, there's a whole lot more diversity building up within Africa. Those Africans that remained in Africa have much more diversity than any trailer park in Alabama. But I guess that goes without saying.
Yeah, I mean, their family tree doesn't fork. I mean, I completely understand it. But you're right about the genetic diversity thing, because that is the key to a species' fitness. Because especially as far as diseases are concerned, your immune system needs to have a wide, I guess, kind of a varied. I'm trying to think of how to put it in layman's terms, like the MHC proteins, but basically a wide, genetics. And
environmental
if you just, yeah, basically, your body needs to be, it's like your Norton's antivirus. You have to have an up-to-date thing that can detect many different things. But what happens to a population if they're in a bottleneck? You basically have a bunch of people that have all the same, will recognize all the same things as foreign and attack that. That's great, but they also all have the same blind spots, which is why it's so good to have the genetic diversity. And there's something called the greater prairie chicken, and cheetahs went through this too, of course, that almost went extinct basically due to lack of genetic diversity, and they were just dying because they simply didn't have it. But they were, I don't want to say engineered, but I mean they were genetically studied heavily and cultured, and basically a healthy population was reestablished, and now they're doing fine. But this is a species that almost died strictly due to a lack of genetic diversity.
Yeah, and since we are talking a little bit about inbreeding, before anything gets personal, no, I will not be making comments about cousin mom and cousin dad.